Tucson, a Sportage, and a CX-50 at 200,000 miles. What actually fails on each one, what the repair costs when it does, and which of the three I'd hand my own money to. That's the whole deal, and you're going to get the honest version rather than the confident one, because on this question, the honest version is more useful. Start with the problem in the title. The CX-50 arrived as a 2023 model. The current Tucson showed up for 2022, the current Sportage for 2023. There is no fleet of these three sitting at 200,000 miles anywhere on Earth yet, and anybody who tells you they tested one is selling something. What does exist is the hardware underneath them. Mazda's 2.5 Skyactiv has been in production since 2012, and there are plenty of them well past 200,000. The Hyundai and Kia 2-seat 5 Smartstream arrived in 2019 and went into the Sonata, the K5, the Santa Fe, the Sorento, and eventually these two. The transmissions are older than the bodies they're bolted into. Same engines, same gearboxes, same couplings. Hundreds of thousands of them already running around out past the point where the warranty quit. Here's the strange part, and it's the reason this comparison is worth half an hour. All three of these trucks make 187 horsepower from a 2.5-liter four-cylinder. Same displacement, same cylinder count, same output, roughly the same price on the window sticker. And underneath, they are engineered so differently that at 140,000 miles, they fail in completely different ways for completely different money. I've had enough oil pans off the Korean 2.5 to know what the pickup screen looks like at that mileage, and enough Skyactiv valve covers off to know what Mazda's answer costs you instead. Three things to hold on to. When we get to the transmissions, one of these three has no fluid change interval printed for normal driving. Not a long one. None at all, and I'll show you the exact wording. Second, one of these engine families has a factory warranty extension running 10 years and 120,000 miles on a cracked cylinder head, and which vehicles are on that list matters enormously if you're shopping used. And near the end, I'll read you the line out of a factory service bulletin that decides whether your engine burning oil counts as a defect or counts as normal. That line is worth about $1,600 of your money over the life of the truck. Let's get into how a compact SUV actually dies, because most people picture the wrong thing. Almost nothing at 200,000 miles dies from the block cracking or a rod coming through the side. That's the dramatic version. The real version is economic. The truck keeps running, but the bill to keep it running crosses the line where it's worth more than the truck, and you sell it to somebody who's going to do the same math and lose. A compact SUV at 200,000 is worth maybe $4,000 on a good day. A cylinder head job is $5,000. That's the whole story of a car's death right there, and every engineering decision we're about to walk through either moves that line out or pulls it closer. Three mechanisms push the line closer, and all three trace back to the same design choice. Every one of these engines is direct injected, meaning fuel gets sprayed straight into the cylinder at very high pressure instead of into the port ahead of the intake valve. Enormous gains in efficiency and power. But it means the back of the intake valve never gets washed with fuel anymore. Think about the fan filter over your kitchen range. Every bit of oil vapor that comes off the pan goes through it, and the grease builds in layers until the airflow drops off. In an old port-injected engine, the fuel spray hosed the valve clean on every single cycle. Take that away, and the crankcase vapors routed back through the intake land on a valve running hot, and they bake on. Carbon buildup becomes a real issue on the Hyundai 2.5 as it approaches around 100,000 miles, and the same physics apply to every direct injected engine ever built. Rough idle, misfires, a soft spot in the throttle response that comes on so gradually you don't notice it until somebody else drives your truck. The old engine builders had a name for the equivalent problem back when it was carbon on the seats and stems, and they solved it with a valve job every 100,000. We solved it with better metallurgy and then reintroduced it on purpose for the fuel economy numbers. Now, item one, and this is the big one, so settle in. The engines. The Hyundai and Kia 2.5 is internally called the G4KN, part of what Hyundai calls the Theta 3 family. Aluminum open deck block with liners, aluminum head, 16 valves, exhaust manifold cast into the head itself. By the way, if you drive an SUV and want to keep it reliable for hundreds of thousands of miles without wasting money at the repair shop, I put together a guide called the 500K Mile Car Care Bible. It covers 101 habits that can help your SUV last longer, the warning signs you should never ignore, and how to spot mechanic upsells that quietly drain your wallet. To get your copy, just scan the QR code on screen with your phone's camera or grab it from the first pinned comment below. And here's the part almost nobody mentions, which is the single smartest thing on this entire engine. It uses combined injection, direct injectors, plus multi-port injectors. There are fuel injectors in the intake ports as well as in the cylinders, which means at low load that engine is still washing the back of its own intake valves with gasoline the way a 1998 four-banger did. Hyundai and Kia looked at the carbon problem, spent the money on a second set of injectors, and engineered their way partly out of it. Mazda did not. The Skyactiv-G is direct injection only, no port injectors, nothing washing those valves. Mazda's answer is that a properly maintained Skyactiv doesn't build enough deposits to matter, which is partly true and partly a decision they'd like you not to examine too closely. So on carbon alone, the Korean pair wins, and that surprises people who've decided in advance that Mazda is the reliable one. Hold that thought, because it doesn't survive the next paragraph. The 2.5 Smartstream has an oil problem. Certain versions built from 2021 through early 2023 are prone to abnormally high oil consumption, some using as much as a quart per 1,000 miles or less, and it traces to the piston ring design compromising the seal between the piston and the cylinder wall, letting oil into the combustion chamber where it burns off with the fuel. Carbon then packs into the ring lands and the piston crown, and it gets worse from there, showing up as misfires, knock, and lost power. The pistons and rings were reportedly redesigned partway through 2023, so 2024 and newer should be substantially better. Should be. Nobody has run one of the revised engines to 200,000 miles either, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. That's the failure mode that eats a Tucson or a Sportage, not a bang. A slow drift where the engine consumes its own oil, the level drops between changes, the owner doesn't check it because modern cars trained us not to, and at some point the bearings run on not enough oil and you get the knock. The engine didn't fail, the oil level failed quietly for 11 months. There is also a recall worth naming honestly, and honestly means naming its size. Hyundai recalled 2025 and 2026 Tucson and Santa Fe vehicles built in a window during 2025 for connecting rod bolts that may not have been properly tightened, and the remedy is a complete engine replacement at no charge. The campaign covers 29 vehicles. 29. Anyone waving that around as proof the engine is junk is padding an argument. It's a torque process that got away from them on one line for a few weeks, they caught it, and they're pulling engines out over it. I'd call that the system working. Now Mazda, and here's where the shine comes off. The 2.5 turbo, the 256 horsepower one that everybody wants, has a cracked cylinder head history. Mazda's own position is that cracks can develop from the stress of the exhaust manifold expanding and contracting, combined with residual stress left in the head casting, and the official repair is a new cylinder head assembly with a redesigned exhaust manifold gasket. Symptoms are slow coolant loss, a sweet smell around the engine bay, and gurgling from behind the dash. And this is the loop I flagged at the start, so here's the payoff in full. Mazda issued a warranty extension, CSP11, covering the coolant leak repair at the cylinder head out to 10 years or 120,000 miles from the original warranty start date. The vehicles on it are 2018 through 2020 Mazda 6, the 2019 CX-5, and the 2016 through 2020 CX-9, all with the 2.5 turbo. Read that list again. The CX-50 is not on it, and a class action filed in 2024 alleges Mazda failed to disclose the defect across a group of vehicles that does include the 2022 through 2024 CX-50, and claims Mazda acknowledged the problem through a series of technical service bulletins without issuing a recall or extending the warranty on those cars. I'm going to be careful here because an allegation in a complaint is not a finding. What I can tell you is what's documented. The extension exists, the CX-50 isn't covered by it, and the engine in the CX-50 turbo is the same basic engine that got the extension in the other cars. Draw your own line through those 3 points. That's a real difference in dollars. On a covered CX-9, that head job is free at 8 years old. On a CX-50, right now, it's yours, and a cylinder head assembly plus the labor to get at it is comfortably 4 figures, in a lot of shops 5. The naturally aspirated 2.5 in the base CX-50 is the one I'd actually buy, and it's got its own wrinkle. It has cylinder deactivation, and the turbo does not. Mazda was the only manufacturer running cylinder deactivation on a 4-cylinder in North America when they launched it, and the engineering challenge is that a 4 running on 2 cylinders wants to shake. It works, owners genuinely can't feel it, and it's a well-executed system. It also puts deactivating hydraulic lifters into an engine that would otherwise have very few moving parts to argue about. That's a preference, not a defect. And I'll say plainly, I don't have high mileage failure data on Mazda's deactivating lifters, and I'm not going to invent a verdict to fill the gap. So on engines, the Korean 2.5 has a carbon advantage and an oil burning liability. The Mazda has a clean intake side reputation it hasn't fully earned and a documented head-cracking history on the turbo that Mazda itself has paid to fix on other models. Neither of those is the answer people expect. Item 2, and this one's short because the fix is short, carbon cleaning. When those intake valves do coke up, the repair is walnut blasting. Crushed shell media fired through the intake port with a vacuum pulling the debris straight back out, 1 cylinder at a time, intake manifold off. Walnut shell is hard enough to chip the carbon off and soft enough not to hurt the aluminum head or the steel valves. For a 4-cylinder at an independent specialty shop, figure $450 to $750, though the broader range runs from $400 past $1,000 depending mostly on how long it takes to get at the ports. It's almost all labor. Once in the life of the truck, maybe twice. Annoying, not fatal. Item 3. The transmissions, and here's that first loop, paid in full. The Tucson and the Sportage use an 8-speed torque converter automatic. The CX-50 uses a 6-speed, also a conventional torque converter unit. Nobody here is running a belt and pulley CVT, which is the single best thing I can say about all 3 of them, because a conventional torque converter automatic is inherently more durable and easier to service than the alternative in this segment. Now the fluid, the Hyundai and Kia 8-speed has no dipstick. To check the level, you pull the splash shield, run the transmission up to a specific temperature window, and crack a level plug on the case with the target somewhere in the range of 122 to 140 degrees while it's running. That's a shop procedure. And the interval in the book is the part that gets me. The severe schedule calls for the fluid at 60,000 miles, and the interval for normal operation is never. Under normal driving, the manual effectively treats it as lifetime fluid. I have never seen a coherent engineering explanation for that gap. Not from Hyundai, not from Kia, not anywhere. Either heat degrades that fluid or it doesn't. If 60,000 is right for a truck that tows and sits in traffic, then infinity cannot be right for a truck that commutes. Somebody made a decision and it wasn't a chemist. Here's what the trade actually does. Independent transmission specialists overwhelmingly recommend changing so-called lifetime fluid somewhere between 60 and 80,000 miles regardless of what the manufacturer says, and the working translation of lifetime in this industry is the life of the warranty. 3 drains and fills over the life of that truck at maybe $150 to $200 each is the cheapest insurance in this entire video against a transmission that costs more than the vehicle. The Mazda 6-speed has a real reputation for toughness, and it's earned. There is one thing I'll flag, and I'm flagging it as workshop talk rather than established fact. Technicians who work on these argue that Mazda had to use a single lockup clutch in the torque converter to smooth out the cylinder deactivation shake, and that this can put iron into the fluid from clutch wear. That's a mechanism I find plausible and cannot verify from Mazda documentation. Treat it as a reason to change the fluid on a deactivation-equipped car rather than as a defect. Same conclusion either way. One more caution on the Korean side, marked clearly as inference. The older Hyundai and Kia 6-speed family built a reputation in transmission shops for wear in the valve body bores and for the internal wiring harness being a weak point, with the pressure-reducing valve bores in particular wearing out even at low mileage. The 8-speed in your Tucson is a different unit, but it comes from the same design house, and if I were placing a bet on where a 200,000-mile Korean automatic gets expensive, that's where I'd place it. That's my read, not a documented pattern. Still with me? Good, because the money starts getting real from here. That's the transmission picture, and it's the one that changes most people's minds. If you want more of this kind of breakdown, subscribe. That's the whole ask. Next up is the driveline, where one of these three hides a repair that runs into 4 figures on a component most owners have never heard of. Item 4. All-wheel drive. None of these three has a proper transfer case or a locking center differential. All three run the same basic architecture. Front-wheel drive most of the time, with an electronically controlled clutch pack in the rear that grabs when the computer decides the front is slipping. The Sportage system uses a multi-plate clutch capable of sending up to half the torque rearward, and Mazda's version is called iActive. That coupling is the part nobody thinks about. It's a wet clutch pack living in a sealed housing at the back of the drive shaft, and it wears. Some Sportage owners have reported clutch wear or rear differential seal leaks starting in the $30,000 to $40,000 mile range, with seal replacement typically running $200 to $400, and the recommendation being to change the transfer case and rear differential fluid every 30,000 to 40,000 miles. Prolonged wheel spin overheats it and accelerates the wear. I want to be fair about the range on a full coupling repair because the estimates vary enormously depending on whether the shop rebuilds it or slots in a new assembly. Take the conservative view. Assume somewhere between $1,500 and $3,000, and assume that at 180,000 miles on a truck worth $4,000, you will not do it. You will drive it as a front-wheel drive vehicle and never mention it to the buyer, and that's the honest reality of what happens to these systems. The fix is stupidly cheap and almost nobody does it. Rear differential fluid, roughly every 30,000 miles. About a quart of specific fluid and 20 minutes on a lift. On the Mazda side, some CX-50 owners have reported a clicking from the rear differential at very low speeds, getting faster with road speed and disappearing by 10 or 20 miles an hour. Early production and worth listening for on a used one. Let's stop and take stock, because a pattern has shown up 3 times now, and it's the whole argument of this video. Every single failure we've covered so far is a maintenance item that was quietly reclassified as a non-maintenance item. The intake valves used to be washed by the fuel, and now they aren't, and nothing in your service schedule mentions it. The transmission fluid used to have an interval, and now it has none. The rear coupling has a fluid nobody will ever tell you to change. Not one of these is a part that broke. Everyone is a service that stopped being printed in the book. From here, the differences get sharper and less mechanical, because past 100,000 miles, the thing that decides whether a truck stays on the road usually isn't the engine. And I still owe you that sentence out of the service bulletin, which is the reason I made this video in the first place. Item 5. The stuff that actually makes people sell a car, which is never what the spec sheet argues about. Owner surveys on these 3 read like a list of small indignities. On the CX-50, a rear hatch that periodically won't open with the button, the remote, or the interior switch, requiring the vehicle to be turned on to get it open, plus screen freezes and, on at least some cars, an oil pan seal that seeped. On the Sportage, interior trim peeling and fading near the glove box and doors, and one owner whose navigation system failed inside a year, and whose car sat at the dealer for 41 days waiting on a replacement. On the Tucson and its cousins, a recall across a long list of Hyundai models for a software error that can make the instrument panel display fail, which puts the vehicle out of compliance with the federal standard covering controls and displays fixable over the air. None of that is mechanical. All of it is why a 5-year-old crossover gets traded. Item 6. Fire, recalls, and what each company does when it finds out. Kia recalled Sportages, Souls, and Seltos models over the electric oil pump assembly, where the controller can overheat and cause a fire, in a campaign covering just under 40,000 vehicles. The specific defect is damaged electrical components inside the controller for the idle stop-and-go oil pump. Mazda recalled 2025 CX-50 and CX-50 hybrid vehicles because front suspension fastener bolts may not have been tightened properly, which can lead to suspension components or a wheel detaching, and 2023 CX-50s over an anti-lock brake hydraulic control unit that can be damaged and reduce braking. I'm not going to rank them on recall count because recall count measures how willing a company is to admit something, not how good the engineering is. The company that recalls 29 vehicles over rod bolt torque is behaving better than the company that issues a bulletin and waits. The signal you actually want is whether the manufacturer paid for the fix out past the warranty. Mazda did that with the coolant leak extension. Hyundai did it with the older engine settlements. Item 7, and it's the shortest one here because there's nothing to argue about. Mechanically, the Tucson and the Sportage are the same truck. Same platform, same 2.5, same 8-speed, same coupling, same electrical architecture, built by the same company. Anyone telling you one of them lasts longer than the other is guessing at noise. Choose on price, warranty terms in your state, dealer, and which dashboard you'd rather look at for 10 years. Now, the sentence I promised you. Your engine burns oil. You notice it at 110,000 miles, you take it in, and the dealer runs an oil consumption test. Fresh oil, sealed, drive it, come back, measure. Reasonable process. What you don't get handed is the number they're measuring against. So here it is, out of Hyundai's own technical service bulletin, number 23 EM008H. If the oil consumption calculation comes out above 1,000 miles driven per quart, the vehicle passes the inspection and the procedure is complete. Sit with that. A quart every 1,001 miles is a pass. Most manufacturers use a version of the same threshold, and to fail it, to get anywhere near an engine claim, you have to be losing more than a quart every 1,000 miles. Do the arithmetic on your own truck because it's your money. 200,000 miles at a quart per 1,000 is 200 quarts of oil. 50 gallons. At what full synthetic costs now, that's somewhere north of $1,600 of oil you buy and pour into an engine that is officially operating normally. That's a set of tires and a timing job, and it never appears in any cost of ownership comparison you will ever read because it isn't a repair. It was defined as normal. Here's the part that should actually make you angry. That threshold is not a law of physics. Nobody measured 1,000 engines and discovered that a quart per 1,000 miles is the natural rate at which a healthy motor consumes oil. It's a line drawn in a document by people whose warranty exposure sits entirely on one side of it. Move it to a quart per 2,000 miles and thousands of engines become claims. Move it to a quart per 500 and almost none do. The number decides who pays, and the people who pay wrote the number. And it works on you twice. First it costs you the oil. Then it costs you the engine, because a truck burning a quart every 1,100 miles is a truck that runs a quart and a half low for weeks at a stretch, since nobody checks a dipstick between changes anymore, and low oil in a modern engine with tight bearing clearances is exactly how you get the knock at 140,000 miles. That everyone then blames on the brand. You are not going to change that number. What you can do is stop letting it be invisible. You know it exists, you know roughly where it sits, and you know that a service advisor telling you your consumption is within normal limits is telling you something narrower and more self-serving than it sounds. He is telling you that your engine is not their problem. That's a different statement, and once you've heard it that way, you can't unhear it. So check your oil. Every second fuel stop, 30 seconds, cold, level ground. If it's dropping, write down the mileage and the amount every time in the same notebook. That log is the only thing that turns your word into evidence, and it costs you nothing but the habit. There's something underneath all of this that I keep circling back to, and it isn't about these 3 trucks. We used to be taught how our machines worked as a matter of course, not because anyone was noble about it, but because the machine would stop otherwise and nobody was coming to help. Somewhere in the last 30 years that got reversed. The car got better in almost every measurable way, and in exchange it stopped explaining itself. The dipstick got replaced by a sensor, the fluid interval got replaced by the word lifetime, and the driver got quietly reclassified from operator to passenger. The trade you were offered was convenience, and the convenience is real. But nobody mentioned the other half, that when you stop being able to tell whether your own machine is healthy, somebody else gets to decide for you, and that somebody has a position in the outcome. Not a villain. Just an interest sitting where yours used to be. The way back isn't learning to rebuild an engine, it's smaller than that. It's knowing 3 or 4 numbers about your own vehicle well enough that nobody can tell you a story about them. What it should burn, what the fluid should look like, what it sounded like when it was right. That's the whole defense, and it's available to anyone willing to spend a minute a week on it. Right. Practical version, in order, and this applies whichever of the 3 you end up with. Oil every 5,000 miles, full synthetic, correct grade, and check the level between changes. On the Hyundai and Kia 2.5, that check is not optional. If it's consuming, log it, date, mileage, quarts added every single time. Transmission fluid, drain and fill every 60,000 miles, regardless of what the manual says or doesn't say. Correct fluid for that specific unit, no universal stuff. If you have the 8-speed, it's a level plug procedure at temperature, so it's a shop job and it's worth the money. Rear differential and transfer case fluid every 30 to 40,000 miles on all-wheel drive. Cheap, quick, and it's the difference between a coupling that lasts the life of the truck and one you abandon at 180,000. Plan a walnut blast somewhere around 100,000 miles and a second one around 180 if you get that far. Budget 500 to 700 and put it in the calendar rather than waiting for the misfire. And if you're buying used, here's the procedure rather than the rule of thumb, because a rule of thumb won't survive a specific car. Get the VIN. Run it through the manufacturer's own recall lookup and the federal database, and note not just open recalls but completed ones, because a completed engine or head repair is a good sign, not a bad one. Then ask the selling dealer in writing whether the vehicle has ever had an oil consumption test performed and what the result was. If they won't answer that in writing, you've learned what you needed to learn. Cold start it yourself before it's been moved and listen for the first 4 seconds. Pull the dipstick and look at the level and the color. On a Mazda Turbo, take the cap off a cold overflow bottle and look for the level being low with no leak on the ground, because that's the head crack signature and it's slow enough to hide. Then check whether that specific model and year sits inside a warranty extension, because on the Mazda 2.5 Turbo, the answer changes the value of the car by several $1,000s. If all of that comes back clean and the price is right, buy the one you like sitting in. All 3 of these will do 200,000 miles if the fluids get changed, and none of them will if they don't. That's the actual answer to the title, and I'd rather give you the true one than a fake winner. If you're pinned down and want my money instead of yours, base CX-50, naturally aspirated, no turbo, because the head issue lives on the turbo and the 6-speed is the simplest thing here. But it's the narrowest of margins, and if the Tucson or the Sportage in front of you has a documented service history and the CX-50 doesn't, take the documented one. History beats brand every time. Now the part I want from you, and I want it from one group specifically. If you're running a Hyundai or Kia 2.5 past 100,000 miles, tell me what it consumes. Real numbers, quarts, miles, model year, and whether you're on the original pistons or a revised engine. I've got documentation and bulletins, and what I don't have is 1,000 people's dipsticks. You do. That's the one data set nobody has and everybody wants, and if enough of you post it, this comment section becomes more useful than the video. And I know exactly who's about to disagree with me. The people who've had a Mazda for 11 years and never opened the hood, and the people who think anything Korean is disposable. Both of you are welcome, and bring mileage with you, because an opinion with a number attached is worth reading, and one without isn't. I read the replies. Genuinely all of them, and half of what ends up in these videos started as somebody correcting me in the comments, so if I've got something wrong here, say so and be specific. Subscribe if you want the rest of it, and there is a rest of it, because there's a thread in here I deliberately didn't pull. That oil consumption threshold isn't a Hyundai number. Nearly every manufacturer uses a version of it, and some of them are worse, and I've been trying to work out for a while now who wrote the first one and why everybody copied it. When I've got that nailed down properly, I'll bring it to you. Check your oil, keep the receipts.